and welcome to another first-rate, phenomenal, superlative, and epic episode of Stardust and Golden. Today is our first video of this year of 2022. We're starting this one off with a whole new series. We're going to be doing, as I mentioned many times, we're going to be doing sailing videos, repair videos, all kinds of videos. But this one is a whole series. I'm going to be a continuous series called Boating or Sailing Failures. This is going to be about things that break on boats, either from design, manufacturing, fatigue, installation, just poor maintenance. And we're going to do not just on my boat, but many boats. I've been talking to a lot of people and investigating things that have failed on their boats. And I'm going to do a video series on this, a continual video series, so other people don't have to live with these same problems, or at least can try to avoid the problems. Many of the things that I'm going to go over in this series can be easily avoided. Or if you're buying a new boat, there are things that you should look at before you actually make the decision to make the purchase. Some boats, even brand new, have some what I would call design flaws. Okay, and what we want to do is we want to get these out in the open so people can, say, hey, I've studied this, I've looked at it, but I didn't know, there was going to be this problem or that problem. Well, we can help you with that. All right. I've been looking at some boats recently that have had some massive failures, and I'm going to do reports on them. I've had some on my own, and we're going to talk about those today. So if you're watching this video and you have any kind of a failure, you want to write in, please do. We have an email address posted, phone number posted, and a post office box posted. So it's very easy to get in touch with us. We would love to hear about it, really, because everything that we can put out there to help the next sailor, especially the new guy who's just starting out, is going to be worth its weight in gold. Okay, to give a little background, the boat we're on right now, we're actually on Stardust right now, our boat. And I'm on here today to discuss a few of the problems I found. Some of those were maintenance issues. The boat, of course, sat for 25 years, so it has a lot of issues. But some of them were design. There's some problems by design. There's some problems that were set up by the manufacturer or the boatyard that sold the boat, because they do a lot of the work too to finish up the boat before it's actually delivered to the customer. And I tell a lot of people, if you're buying a used boat, hire a marine surveyor. And if you're buying a new boat, definitely hire a marine surveyor. It's going to save you a lot of money in the long run, and there's a lot of shortcomings on new boats depending on what you're after. All boats are a compromise. If you're looking for an offshore boat or a racing boat, there's going to be some positive and negative qualities about that vessel. Our boat was strictly made for long distance voyaging across the oceans. It's a blue water boat. It's a 41-foot 1987 Trans World 41. I could go on for 3 days about all the great features of this boat. It's strong, it's sturdy, it's extremely well built, extremely heavy. It's got its drawbacks. It's hard to maneuver. It doesn't sail real well in light winds. But we noticed some design functions that were just not good for offshore use, things that you really want to avoid. And I'll go over those quickly, and I'll give demonstrations or show you what's going on. But I noticed that the cockpit had design errors. There's functional errors with some of our flooring. There was a catastrophe with a shifter cable that wasn't installed right, and a holding tank that just completely collapsed into the bilge from poor installation, and a battery box that I would consider deadly. Yeah, absolutely. So there's things you want to watch out for. And I'm going to go over those with this vessel, and then on the next series I'm going to talk about some other vessels that I've inspected and some friends that have had some problems with their boats that I haven't necessarily inspected, but they wrote to me, or I talked to them over the phone about some of their problems. And I'll go over those too, just so you have an idea of sort of things you could look for in an offshore boat or any boat, whether you're sailing on the open oceans, the Great Lakes, San Francisco Bay, or a small inland lake somewhere. There's a lot of things you want to be prepared for and look out for. And one of them is poor poor maintenance is the biggest problem with boating failures. And when I say sailing failures or boating failures, I certainly don't mean driving into a dock at night, or hitting a sandbar in afternoon after a couple of drinks, or clawing off a lee shore and dragging anchor all the way into the beach in your boat. There's plenty of videos about that stuff out there. There's plenty of videos about strong, well-made boats. I'm just going to go over the problems with some of the boats. This one here is extra strong. I mean, it's got a very high static stability, a very high dynamic stability, extremely heavily built. It's got a very good comfort ratio, very high comfort ratio, a very wonderful prismatic coefficient on the underwater side. So it's got a lot of wonderful qualities to it for offshore use and for heavy blue water. But there's a few things I want to go over that weren't so good. Some of it was from the manufacturer, some of it was from the designer himself. So we're going to go over that in just a second. Okay, this is one of the first things I noticed when I surveyed the boat in April of 2021 was the cockpit drains. Now this is a center cockpit catch. It doesn't have a lot of area. I'll move here so we can see how much actual area there is. It's a smaller footboat, but even for this kind of square footage, there was only 2 drains in the back. And there's one, and there's number 2. Now the forward section of this does not. It looks like they should have been there, but they did not install them. And there's a little bit of reason for that, and I'll go over that in a few minutes. But the problem is that even though it's a small cockpit and it's a center cockpit, it could still take on green water in a real bad seaway. And there's quite a bit of cubic feet here for green water to be sitting. And the designers, most naval architects have a formula for how fast a cubic foot of water should exit this cockpit. And I can't remember those numbers offhand. It's been many years since I studied that. But water needs to exit the cockpit as quickly as possible. And that was the first thing we saw. I want at least 4 2-inch drains on any cockpit on an offshore boat. I would feel a lot more comfortable with that. These are probably 1.5-inch max, maybe 1 1/4, and I just would like to see 2 more of them. I consider that a design flaw. And I also would like to see more scuppers on the coamings. The coamings only have a few for water exit. There's one right there. It's approximately 4 inches by 1 inch. And there's only 2 on the whole length of the boat. So that's another shortcoming. I consider that a shortcoming on this type of vessel. If this boat's all covered in green water, it's going to be hard to get that water off of this deck or the cockpit with such small drainage. So that was the first thing. Now, inside the cabin, sorry about the phone being jerking around all over here. But the next thing we noticed was that for an offshore boat, all the flooring, these panels are pretty heavy. These are the floor panels. And they're very well built, very solid. But in a seaway, those things are going to go flying because there is no latch holding them down. And here's an example of one. This just lifts up, and there's nothing really blocking that in. There is no lock on it whatsoever or latch. It just sits in the hull. Now, if this boat was severely knocked down, or there was people in the cabin during a real rough storm, these things could be flying all over and actually injure somebody and injure them badly. These could become deadly weapons. And I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have 7 of these throughout the boat. So that's a lot of dangerous things. I don't think that any on an offshore boat, or any boat actually, even in the Great Lakes where we're sailing this, should not have any panels or flooring that could come loose and be thrown around a cabin. So I have them under here too. Underneath each of the seats, there's panels. There's really nothing holding that in there except for the cushions. A dangerous situation at best. Very, very dangerous. Second thing that happened to us is we got in a little bit of a rough sea for a short spell, And because it was not mounted properly, that is our holding tank. It was held in suspended by 4 screws on each side. So there was a total of 8 screws holding that in, 10-gallon tank. It cracked the beam and fell right to the bilge. So that is something that we have to remount, and that was purely bad design. Poor installation. It should have never been mounted like that. It needed to have support from underneath, not suspension. If that thing, and it was full, but if you were offshore in really heavy seas, that could have caused a lot more damage. And then once it's loose in there, she could rattle around and pound a hole through the hull. So very dangerous situation. I consider that a total fail. Okay. So if you have a holding tank or fuel tanks, water tanks on your boat, always make sure that they're well mounted. You do not want to go through that, especially if it's going to break. It's going to break at the worst possible time. Don't let that happen to you. Find a way to mount them solidly, not 8 wood screws. Which brings me to a second failure. I'm going to take you around to the rear cabin. This is actually installation problem from the factory or the boat dealer when the boat was new. We haven't touched anything on this boat, and the original owner only sailed it a little bit before he parked it. As you can see, we got 4 large batteries in there. That is, those are all lead acid batteries. They're very heavy. I'm going to take a wild guess and just say that I have not scaled those, so I don't know their exact weight. But let's just say for argument that they're 50 pounds. So at 4, okay, so we have 200 pounds of weight there. Now the ABYC, the American Boat Yacht and Boat Council, and the ABS, and even Lloyd's Registry suggest that no battery on a boat should move more than 1 inch in any direction when double its weight is applied as force. So in other words, these 4 batteries at 200 pounds, I should be able to put 400 pounds of force on those, and they shouldn't move in any direction. Yet you could see there was never any hold down straps or bars or box. It's just 4 batteries sitting there. This is called a sailing failure. These could go launch right through the hull. Worst case scenario, if the boat was to turn turtle, those would go right up and smash right through that hatch, or could even pierce this cabin top. Not good. They could bounce around in a hull and shatter this hull and go end up putting her right on the bottom. Now, here's the second problem with this battery installation was it's sitting on a piece of plywood. Now, it's a very sturdy plywood, and I built a backing plate for it underneath, which I have not installed yet. But this was held in by 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is, again, is 8 screws, wood screws that were holding this in. So even with the batteries bolted to this platform, only 8 wood screws are holding that in. There's no way that 8 wood screws going into some very lightweight beams are going to hold those batteries in there. That's a disaster. That's a total failure. So I'll show you what we did to fix that. I designed and had my company build these. This is stainless steel. This is basically just angle. And I welded, threaded. I took some tubing, some stainless tubing, and welded, threaded. First I drilled them and threaded them, and then I welded them to this bar, or had them welded to this bar. And now what we're going to do is mount this underneath the beam and just screw it with wood screws right to the beam. Now the force won't be on those wood screws at all. It's going to be on the bottom of this up against the beam. Then we're going to bolt that plywood cover in through these. Now we have 4 of those for each side of the beam. The problem is that we had to come up with was how to get that hatch off in a hurry, because you never want anything permanently sealed on a sailboat. You need to be able to get to all areas of the bilge in an emergency. So you never want to totally seal anything off completely. So it would be very difficult in a really rough sea or a storm to unscrew the 12 bolts that are holding this battery box down. So we came up with a plan to weld wing nuts on the top of each of the bolts, and then we'll put them in there with anti-seize compound. This is I think it's 304 stainless on the nuts that I made. That's 304 stainless, and the bar is actually 316L. So I have, uh, I believe that the integrity of this is going to be absolutely sufficient for what we're building. And those batteries, once they're all chained down, will not be able to move at all. And that's very important because you cannot have objects flying around the cabin. Here's another problem we found too. This is a boat fail. These cabinets, they're really nice. They have spring-loaded catches on them, okay? The problem with these is that if anything bumps against them in a real seaway, they're coming open, and everything inside is coming out, and it's going to end up on the floor. Now, when your whole boat empties up onto the floor, you have a lot of stuff to walk around in case of any emergency. So, sailing failure. So if you have any kind of cupboards like that that do not have latches, put latches on them, and never rely on anything spring-loaded on a boat. And the ABYC suggests that too, because springs can fail, especially if they're made out of stainless that has low integrity, or if they're made out of steel, they'll rust down. Especially in salt water, you got to be really careful. And if they go into oxygen starvation, no matter what kind of metal they are, if they're sitting in water for a long period of time and go into hydrogen and oxygen starvation, well, that could be a problem, and they'll just fatigue and break. So it's good to have some sort of, I'm going to put bronze latches on these on the bottom that are easy to maintain, clean, and release. They got to be quick release for any kind of an emergency. Okay, one more thing that we found with our boat when we first got it was the throttle, not the throttle, I'm sorry, the shifter cable. This shifter cable failed. And the reason it failed was not by design, it was by installation. The lowest part, as you can see right there, and this failed again. Failures happen at the worst possible time that you can imagine. This failed when we were being blown into another boat. We were in reverse, and we pushed it, the gear shifter, into forward and full board it to get away from the boat. Unfortunately, it would not go into forward. We were still in reverse. And this is the reason why. The boat stopped shifting at that moment, and we full bore, full throttle reverse right into somebody's boat because of that cable. Easy fix. The problem was the cable was looped. The lowest spot of any cable on your boat should be, absolutely, the lowest spot would be the termination of the outer tube. You can see this is the inner. I'll try to show you there. That's the inner cable. The inner cable, it doesn't matter if that goes up, down, it does not matter. But the lowest point of this cable needs to be this outer tube, because if it's not, and it's looped like this one was, water, moisture, humidity, anything that gets in there will sit in that dip. So basically, it sort of looked like the bottom of a sink drain, how it has the little S hook in it. This was like that. It had, this was looped low, and then it came up to its termination point, which is about probably only an inch or two higher than the low point was. But that was enough for moisture to sit in that spot. And again, you could see stainless steel does corrode. So what happened was the internal is still functionable, but all the wire surrounding it that was the integrity of the outer cable is gone. They completely broke and rotted right out. We couldn't see it because when I inspected the boat and did a full survey on her, this cable had no cracks and looked great. And I didn't put a bright light to it. If I would have put a bright light to it, I probably would have seen the discoloration in there, but I failed to do that. So this is a failure from both maintenance and installation, because under a maintenance, I would have noticed that being looped down like that and probably changed it. So that's another failure. Okay, back on board, and to discuss further on the cockpit trains, this down here is our engine well, and we were lucky enough to have some versions of this boat do not have this open area here that we have. And right up here is basically the inside wall of the cockpit. So if we did bring two tubes down here, sorry about the mess. We're still in a construction zone, but if we did bring the tubes from the front of that cockpit through, they would actually have to pierce up in here and follow down right next to this spindle and down through the engine well, which is not a real big problem. It would just be very unsightly, and that's possibly why they didn't do it from the factory. It might have just been an aesthetic problem. And on the other side, it probably wouldn't be as bad. And I might just add 3 drains instead of the 4th, which would bring that 4th right into here and be in a really ugly spot. But 3 2-inch drains would certainly be sufficient. And again, a center cockpit on a vessel this size usually does not take on a lot of green water. That's usually over your bow and your poop deck. And we're sufficiently high out of the water on those too. So right now in Lake Erie, we're not too overly concerned about taking, 60,000 pounds of water over the poop deck and ending up in the cockpit. That's just not something that we expect. But on an offshore boat, yeah, I would prepare for that. So we think we probably might be sufficient with 3. Most architects, I think, would agree that the 2 that are on there are probably easily sufficient if it wasn't for the lack of a bridge deck. See, this goes right down, let's see if I can show you, the companionway goes right down to the cockpit sole. There's only about 2 inches of height difference there, instead of having a whole bridge deck that would be the same height as the seating here. So that's 1 or 2 trains would be fine if there was a bridge deck there. But the fact that there is no bridge deck always makes me think, well, if we did take in a big major wave, or we were in a heck of a rainstorm, it would be nice to have a bridge deck. But since we don't, we're going to have to manufacture a nice, at least partial storm slide that's well gasketed, because we don't want the water going through. So we already designed one, we just haven't manufactured it yet, which will slip in there. It'll semi-lock down, clip down, and it'll have a pressed-in gasket to keep water from intruding into the cabin, because we do have a very high sill between the cockpit sole and the floor of the cabin, and wet stairs could lead to tragedy. So we really want to keep those dry. Even with non-skid on there, it would be pretty tragic. We have a height of probably 3 feet between the companionway sill, and our water line is just above this flooring. So there's darn near 3 feet, and that's probably one of the reasons they didn't cross line the 2 drains that are on that. Usually a lot of smaller boats, they cross over from, the drains will cross from starboard to port, port to starboard, just so when the boat's heeled, it doesn't take water back into the cockpit. There's a formula for that too. I know it's based on load water line, but I can't remember. It's been too many years. I can't remember the calculation for that, to where you can get up to a point where you just run straight pipe down. But you could look up any book on architecture, naval architecture, or read anything from Richard Henderson. He discusses a lot of those formulas in a lot of his books, and a lot of safety features. And I can't stress enough to other fellow sailors how important a book like, I believe it's called Sea Sense by Richard Henderson, is one of the most valuable books there is on the market when it comes to offshore design. So if you're thinking about sailing around the world, or packing up a family to spend a year abroad, it's a good read. It really is. So that's going to be about it for today. Now I'm going to do the next series probably this week. And what I'll do is I'll go over some more stuff regarding the other boats that I've looked at. And one of those I'll discuss in just a second. Right, before we wrap it all up, I just wanted to say thanks for watching. But I do want to bring up the most recent inspection that I did on a boat. I saw a guy in another marina locally that he was towed in with his sailboat. Major disaster. He was out there in rough weather and he lost his steering. And after he lost his steering, I think by brute force, he was trying to force it, and he had a wheel with cable steering. And I knocked the chain off the pedestal and broke both the wires, the wire rope on the quadrant, or his Now, it was a well-built boat, a well-designed boat, and he had a spade rudder. It wasn't mounted to a skeg or a keel. And somehow the spade locked up. I believe, I haven't inspected it yet out of the water, which I'm hoping to do this week. But for some reason, it may have been a spacer that came out of the shaft and dropped down. But it wouldn't turn more than about 4 or 5 degrees. And when he felt locked up, he put too much force on it. The big disaster for him was that the cables came loose because they weren't correctly mounted on the quadrant. There was only one saddle per side instead of two, and the two saddles that were on there were both backwards. They were not rigged correctly at all. The saddles were on the dead end of the wire rope, and that's a no-no. They should have been actually reversed from that. There should have been two on each side. So it was a complete failure for him. He had to be towed in. And I'm going to update on that as soon as I get more information. I also have a friend. I will put links up for her, and she can explain her own story. I talked to her on the phone with it. She has the same boat that we have, and she found excessive amounts of water and even some diesel fuel inside her molded keel. It's fiberglassed in, so where the water was coming from is still what I would like to know, and the diesel fuel. So my guess is it was probably from inside the bilge, but it's hard to say without a full investigation and being there with the boat. But she's got videos on it, and I will link you to those so you can see that, because they're really good videos. She's really got a lot of good information. And she's been doing a lot of repairs, and they're pretty much resurrecting their boat as we are with ours. And I will continue to do more videos on this, so please, if you're watching this, please subscribe. And if you have any kind of problems with your boat, any failures at all, whether it's an electrical failure, an engine failure, transmission, running rigging, standing rigging, write to us, call us, send us an email, let us know. We would like to be able to share it. It was only because of previous sailors that I know what I know today, and I'm able to look for when I buy my own boats and when I sail my own boats. It's all because of the sailors before me. So if we could help anybody else out so they don't have to survive the same disasters we may have, let's do that. Let's make some videos so everybody can get something out of them. There's nothing worse than being out there in the open waters and having something fail on you when it could have been avoided. So if you have anything at all you could share with us, please do. We would really enjoy it. And, if you want to be anonymous about it, you can be anonymous, or we can put your name out there. But please let us know. Anyways, thank you for watching. Please subscribe. And we are going to be doing some sailing videos coming up really soon. So along with the sail failures, we are going to do some sailing and some other things that are more fun and upbeat. So thanks for watching.